Okay, so welcome everyone to this little workshop. My name is Lynne Davis. I'm a psychotherapist and I work with predominantly young people and their parents, people who've had tricky starts, and my background is working with kind of CAMS. So I've got a good understanding of anxiety, but also kind of things that get in the way of life sometimes, and including anxiety, which is what I'm going to talk to you today about. I'm going to start off just by talking a little bit about what is anxiety. Some of you, that might just be a refresher. And for some of you, that will be kind of hopefully just to bring you up so we're all talking the same language. And then the second part of today's workshop will be about some techniques you can use. And I'm going to introduce you to a couple of maybe that you've heard of, and then to something called havening, which is a new therapy coming through that's having really good effect with anxiety and trauma-based challenges. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Let me just do that now. And then we will start. Here we go. Good. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, so anxiety. What is it? It is a natural human reaction, and that's important. We all have anxiety. How it comes out is often the difference, but it involves our body and our minds. And that's a basic survival function. So it's important we do have it. It's part of our alarm system. And if we don't do anxiety, we could actually get ourselves in some serious problematic places. So we don't want to lose anxiety. It's part of, like I say, that kind of keeping ourselves alive as a species, but also in terms of functioning in the day-to-day life. And of course, at the moment, there's a lot of anxiety around with our society because of COVID and the pandemic. And that means that our whole lives have changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. You know, it's something there about some people have got the benefits of maybe working at home, which they didn't know about, but that in itself can be stressful and bring anxiety. So just because we have things that are kind of considered more positive doesn't mean it's not going to bring anxiety. But also with COVID, we've got loss, we've got changing in our circumstances of how we interact with people. So that's going to generate huge anxiety for us as a population here in the UK, but also internationally. And so even if we're not thinking we're feeling anxious, we're part of a very anxious world at the moment. And one of the things about anxiety is we pass it along. So human feelings, we pass along. We've all had the experience, I'm sure, of walking into a room and kind of picking up feeling. And anxiety is one of those. We pick it up very quickly. So we might not have felt anxious, but we pick it up from other people. And so it's important we kind of pay attention to anxiety and how we know when we're anxious. So acute anxiety, that moment when you kind of have something happen in the moment, you'd get your physical sensations. So your heart goes faster, your breathing changes, your muscles tense, you might get sweaty palms, you get the kind of queasy stomach. So, you know, people talk about butterflies, things like that. You might shake, you might get trembly hands. And that's all part of a fight, flight, freeze response. So that's when anxiety is that acute, almost shock kind of experience. Those are kind of some of the obvious things that we might see or feel, but sometimes if we've had long-standing anxiety, we might not even notice some of those things. Our body might have adapted a little bit. So anxiety can be mild and it can be extreme. So it might stop us from going out. It might get to the point where people feel able to not be able to go into colleges or into workplaces. Or you might notice that you're just feeling a little bit uneasy, but still be able to do that. So that's sort of the mild side of things. I'm going to, she says, use the right mouse, Lynn. There we go. I'm going to play you a little clip now, and it's just to sort of show you a little bit about anxiety, but also in this situation, in this little clip, it's a very brief clip about school, but we could replace school with anything here. So we could replace it with going into college, into university, into a new job, into a new house, anything like that. So I'm just going to play this clip, and if you watch it with that in mind.
You know that scared or nervous feeling you get when you have to do something you're not you can do, or go somewhere you've never been before? That feeling is called anxiety. And it can feel a bit different for each person, but it usually doesn't feel very nice. Maybe your palms get sweaty, or your body tenses up, or maybe you get a tummy ache. Maybe you've heard of anxiety, or maybe you haven't, but you've definitely felt it before, because everyone feels it sometimes. It's normal. You want to know something really weird about anxiety? It's actually trying to help you. It's true. All those uncomfortable feelings, those happen because your brain thinks you're in danger, and it wants to protect you. When our muscles tense up and we sweat, it gets us ready to do a lot of exercise, which is helpful if you need to jump out of the way of a runaway train or wrestle a wolverine. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When your brain does this, it's called fight, flight, or freeze. The problem is, sometimes your brain gets confused and it can't tell the difference between a charging moose and, say, going to a new school. Both things can be scary and cause anxiety. But there aren't any dangerous wild animals at a new school, hopefully. Understanding where anxiety comes from is the first step in learning to deal with it. So the next time you're in one of those tough situations and you start to feel those feelings, like butterflies in your stomach or sweaty palms, or it gets hard to talk or move, remember, there's nothing wrong with your body. You're just having normal feelings of anxiety, and they're actually trying to help, even if they're not very good at it sometimes.
Okay. So when it's ongoing, that's that acute side. You go into school, you go into a new workplace, you go into doctor's surgery, somewhere like that, you have that initial anxiety. When it's ongoing, so it's something that's prolonged, like COVID at the moment, it's ongoing, we're still not sure what restrictions, what's not happening. It's an ongoing nature. It can really start to affect our bodies and how we function. And that's often when it becomes more of a disorder. So when we're thinking a bit about what makes people talk about anxiety disorders, there's some part of that is because it's ongoing for long periods of time. But when we're in this current situation, we will have ongoing anxiety, maybe coming up for transitions of schools or out into the community. That's not going to be a quick thing. It takes time. I'm currently waiting to move house, for example, and that's been going on for 2.5 months. And I notice that my anxiety is still present with that because it's an ongoing waiting for something to happen. So when in that situation, what happens is our muscles can have that tension, but it goes on. So you might start developing kind of aches and pains, headaches start to come. People feel restless. They just can't relax with that ongoing nature. So although they're kind of like, I'm not sure why I'm fidgeting, or I'm not sure why I just can't focus on anything, I can't sit still. So that difficulty in concentrating might be that ongoing underlying anxiety that's really starting to impact on bodies and function. Sleep difficulties. We know that sleep and anxiety are highly linked. So, when you start having difficulties, again, some of the research coming out of this current situation in the world is people's sleep's been really badly affected. By having dreams, just not getting good sleep, even if they're sleeping for a long period of time. That feeling of fatigue. Your body's been in this kind of state of tension and kind of fighting the moose or fighting the kind of ongoing kind of fear for a long period of time means that you feel fatigued. And that can obviously impact on your immunity, and people start getting ill. So you might find that when you're in that stress state for longer, you get more colds, you get more things that you sort of would normally be able to kind of fight off, but our immunity starts to get affected. Okay, so in the little clip, what it did allude to is we have normal anxiety, and we all have anxiety, and when it becomes that prolonged anxiety, it can affect us, and that's when we start to look at what do we do. We'll look at that in a minute. But of course, we don't want to get rid of anxiety. We want to make friends with it. And I know when I work with young people that come maybe with anxiety or panic disorders or agoraphobia or anything like that, where they really are struggling with anxiety, they're always really surprised when I say, well, we don't want to get rid of it, we want to make friends with it. And they're like, but I don't want to be anxious. Absolutely, it's not that we want people to be kind of overwhelmed by anxiety, but we need it a little bit, and that's because it helps us to keep us focused. So little bits of anxiety help us to focus. A little bit of stress, they keep us alert, so it keeps us kind of listening. If we were completely unaware, we wouldn't pick up on kind of hazards in the world. It helps us to be ready to head off potential problems. So if we're kind of a bit more aware, maybe in the workplace, I might pick up on something that comes through an email, for example, and I think, oh, hang on, I need to just pay attention to that. Didn't feel. So anxiety can be a really good feeling if we know how to manage it. Okay, it helps us to perform. So sports people will often say that they need their anxiety. I was a classic. I need anxiety to be able to do when I did my university degrees. If I didn't, I was a last minute person, and that was because I needed some anxiety. If I got to that point where I had some anxiety, I could perform. I could put my essay out. I could go and, make the phone calls I need to do. But if I've got too much time and my anxiety isn't kind of high enough, I don't perform as well. The more I know that about myself, and that's kind of today's talk as well, sort of getting to know yourself, the more you can use your anxiety in a healthy way. So it's got to be that healthy adaptive mechanism, and we'll talk about that. So that's why I'm saying it's important that we have anxiety and make friends with it, because it can be very helpful. Okay, so what makes us anxious? In the CAMS research, it looks at 3 things that make us anxious, that being kind of ambiguous events or situations, so things that are open to interpretation. So if we think a little bit about what happened initially with COVID, people are like, oh, the rules don't make any sense. They were open to interpretation. So that creates anxiety, because unless it's not kind of clear, we can get anxious. Something about kind of when you're being judged on something, maybe that's quite subjective, that can make you anxious because it's kind of open to interpretation. Novel and new things. So we don't have experience to draw on, so that can make us really anxious. And again, it might be something that we perceive as positive, maybe moving out, going to university. I've got young people I work with who've just gone off, and of course they are anxious because they've never done this before. This is new. And it brings both excitement and anxiety, and that can be really tricky sometimes, because anything that brings excitement and anxiety together, they're quite similar experiences in terms of internal body feelings, and so it can get a bit confusing. So it's important we kind of notice that. And unpredictable, so unclear how things will turn out. So like transitions, we don't know how it's going to be when we move on to somewhere new. Thinking about when I've moved jobs, for example, I don't know what's going to happen when I get there. So of course that brings the unpredictable nature of that, and then I can feel anxious about that. Because I can't jump into what would happen. And that's made worse because we have the capacity to think into the future as humans, which is a really good thing. And again, one of those things that helps us, but it can also create more anxiety, because when we're thinking into the future, we tend to, as human beings, think into the kind of what's the worst thing that would happen. So we predict negative things that can make us even more anxious. It's going to go wrong. It's that might happen. This might happen. And of course, usually those events, when you get there, none of those things happen. But we can create that anticipatory anxiety, it's called, because we have the capacity to think into the future. Okay, so I just want to touch on what's called zones of regulation, and this is comes from the OTs, the occupational therapists, originally. So I was trained as an OT as well. So I use some of this, and I think it's really helpful. You'll see that in my next slide, I'll go into thinking about the window of tolerance. And a lot of times people have heard of that more, and they're the same. But I quite like this one because it's colours, and it makes a bit more sense to me. Okay, so there's 4 zones we talk about in terms of our brains and our bodies. We have what's called the blue zone. That's when your body's running on slow, such as when you're tired, sick, bored. Sometimes people are just kind of more sloth-like. So the engines take, or slug-like, take too slow to kind of, it's too slow. And we don't function well because our brains equally are running on that kind of slow processing. That might be more of that kind of, when you thought about the little clip earlier, that more freeze response can fit in that we're feeling a bit kind of frozen stuff, can't quite get ourselves moving, can't get out the door on time, can't quite shift us into what we call the just right stage. So that's your blue. That would be what we call hypo, and I'll show you that in a minute. Then we have what's the green zone. So this is like green light, it's good for go. You're generally feeling happy, calm, focused. So we talk about calm alert. It's just right in OT language. And that's because our brain's in a really good place. We're not kind of overwhelmed by feelings. So we've got our good thinking lobes on. That's great. When we've got our thinking lobes on, we can make really good decisions usually. We know what's right and wrong. We can make good strategies like, oh, I think today I might do some mindfulness. That's really easy to do when you're in the green zone because your body's in a calm, relaxed place, which means that your brain is using that lovely frontal lobe that we have as a human being. When we start to get kind of feelings come up, so like we found about COVID, we start to get a bit wobbly, people start talking about it, start coming up for transitions, changing environments, we start to get the feelings come up, maybe some anxiety, some worry, get a bit frustrated, something's not happening, then it needs to happen. My house move created frustration because it's not moving at the pace I needed to move at. So of course I'm a bit frustrated. Yeah, it can also be that kind of what we classify, or people usually tend to classify as kind of good feelings. Now I'm a therapist, so I like all feelings, and all feelings are important. They're all good feelings to me. But people say that sort of silliness start to get kind of silly. Or surprised. So those can be kind of just being cautious. So that's your kind of cautiousness. That means that your thinking is still online. You've still got your frontal lobe, but it's starting to be kind of playing a role with your kind of feeling brain. You kind of, I'll show you in a clip in a minute about downstairs brains. So your feelings start to kind of take the fall, which means that your thinking can start to become a bit fuzzy. Okay, so that's your yellow zone. At that point, we often need to start putting some strategies in for ourselves to try and bring us back into that green. For people who've had a really tricky start, sometimes they don't even know what green is because they've never really had green. So a lot of the clients I work with, some of my people who've had a really tricky start, they've never known green. As babies, they didn't know green. And so actually, so my job is to help them to know what green feels like and to know that it's okay to be green, because actually yellow can feel a little bit kind of, that's the norm. And that's okay as long as it's functional, as long as you can get through your day and do what you need to do. Then we have the red zone. So that's when we've got those really big feelings, we kind of explode, or kind of aggression might come out, or terror, fear response. So that would be your fight, flight response, and freeze. But then, like I said, freeze can tip you into that blue. So you get that kind of big feelings. Now that might be big, just overwhelm, and you're just going too fast. Your body's too fast, and you can't think. Okay, at that point, all those lovely strategies that you know are out the window. So I used to have a client I worked with a long time ago, an adult client, who, when we were in the kind of green yellow, she knew some lovely strategies and she used them really well. But of course, when she went into the red, she just couldn't hold on to them. And that made her frustrated with herself, but actually she couldn't have. There's no way, because she'd lost that frontal lobe. And that's about kind of helping people to know then what to do at those times. And it usually is kind of bigger stuff, being out, going out. kind of squeezing pillows, doing kind of bigger things to get some back into that yellow and then green. We talk about heavy work at that point. Heavy work can be a good thing, pushing, pulling, kind of lifting, those kind of big things that get our muscles working. So this might be a little bit more familiar, this kind of window of tolerance, and this is exactly what I've just said, but in colors. So we've got our green zone, which is that middle, the optimal arousal zone. Usually we go up and down in that a little bit during the day. That's okay. After lunch lull, might come down in that one a little bit. Hopefully we don't go into hypo-arousal, then you'll be kind of really not taking on board what's happening, but we might. So the above, the signs of hyperarousal are your kind of red. Your orange zone is sort of the top of that arousal level tipping into, so it's quite a narrow band actually. And then we've got the blue, which would be at the bottom. So signs of hyperarousal might be the kind of agitation or kind of more kind of talking quickly or those kind of things. Your hypoarousal, you just slug-like, sloth-like, zoned out, staring, not really kind of with us. So those are the red and the orange and then the blue. We really are aiming for that optimal arousal level. And so some of the strategies I'm going to talk to you about is trying to keep us in that. Sometimes it's about getting us into it, sometimes it's keeping us. So when you're in the orange, you can do some of these strategies to keep yourself orange green. Okay, I hope this is all making sense. So sometimes it's about playing detective with ourselves. You know we're doing something, why? Most of us don't know why we do behaviors. And the reason I put a tree there is because we see our behaviors with the tree as the outside world. We might find ourselves agitated or but kind of turned off or going to the cupboard to eat something or all of those. But actually there's things driving our behavior, which is our roots. And those come from when we were very little. So without us kind of going and playing detective and working out why we do stuff, then we wouldn't know what's driving our behavior, so we keep doing it. And sometimes we can tweak behavior, but it'll come out somewhere else unless we start to look at those roots and pay attention to it. Why am I feeling anxious? What is that about? So my frustration at not being able to move, for example, is I like to feel a bit in control, like I'm from South Africa when things were really tricky. So control for me is quite important. And so when I don't have control and it's all in the hands of maybe the solicitors, that's going to make me a bit more anxious. And I know that because I've done lots of work over the years. But most people haven't had to or don't know why they do behavior. And that's important for parents to notice, because you might be saying to a young person, well, why did you do that? And they have no idea. They really don't. Well, they'll make it up because they want to please you. And then some of what we need to do is help them understand. So again, they might be showing angry on the outside, but actually underneath, it's fear-based. They're worried, they're anxious. They might be being defiant, but actually underneath that is, again, worry that maybe the adult's untrustworthy, or maybe that they're feeling so wobbly that you couldn't look after them or give them help, all those kind of things. And if we target what's below, if we target the roots, then the behavior will automatically start to shift. So that's important when we're looking at anxiety. We give strategies for the tree, for the behaviors, but we also want to look at, so where's it coming from? That causes the longer term change. So something like panic, we're going to give you some strategies to manage panic, but also thinking, well, when did it start and what that might be like so that you can support yourself going forward. Okay, obviously when you're in the kind of green and yellowish, the low yellow, that's when you've got the capacity to think about roots. When you're in the red, you don't have the capacity to think. If you really are terrified by something, I come from South Africa, so like I said, so if you're out in the bushveld and you see a lion, we don't think. That's important to acknowledge. So when we're really anxious, you don't think. Your frontal lobe goes offline, like I said, you don't think. You got to run, hopefully. That would be your strategy that you chose. You don't have a choice of that. Your body will choose, but hopefully it chooses to run. Only once you're safe can you then start to reflect on what happened. What was that like? How terrifying that was. What would you do next time? Maybe to avoid the situation, maybe to make it safer. So, there is something about when you're in the red, you don't have that frontal lobe. It takes time to come into that place where you're feeling calm. And sometimes that can take days, it can take weeks. you don't necessarily bounce straight back to feeling okay. So just to be mindful of that when you're working with your children or young people, that it can take them a while to feel safe enough again to be able to think. People often think they need to do it there and then in the moment. Well, what's happening? What's going on now? Actually, it's important we just regulate them, bring them back in with the strategies into that green zone. And then when they're ready, like I say, it can be weeks later. The good analogy I use for that is obviously doing therapy with young people. I see them weekly, and they might walk out of my room and something happens, but we talk about it the week after or 2 weeks after that, and it's absolutely okay. So parents will say, but we know, what about in the moment? It's okay. Give yourself time to let everyone's system calm and get to that place of green, calm, alert, where your thinking brain is back online. Then you can look at what other routes, things like transitions. We want to look at what's happened in the past around transitions, people who've had lots of losses or abrupt endings. That will come up. And again, it's unconscious. It's not something you necessarily think about. But when I'm moving house, I've obviously moved house a couple of times in my past, but I've also moved countries, and I've had loss. And so all of that is going to come in to how I feel about this situation. So again, about COVID, our experience of people making rules for us, safety, the world not feeling particularly safe at the moment, who's safe and who's not safe, can we be with people, can't we be with people? That's all in the mix, whether we're able to articulate it or not. So the roots behind our behaviour. So when you're doing transitions, like I said, it's important to pay attention to young people's transitions before, but also things that might come with that. So feeling rejected, having to have moved house, you might feel rejected, you might feel abandoned. Some of those really fundamental human feelings can be really triggered about then going on to the next thing. Can I feel safe going on? One of my colleagues I work with, she's her son, and she would share the story with you, so I know it's okay. When he left school and moved on to college, for example, he didn't trust adults. He'd had a very tricky start, and he'd learned to trust his mum, but it had taken a long time, and she was pretty much the only mum, and his dad were the only two people that he really was able to trust, and maybe not even 100%. When he went for the college interview, he was terrified, and his mum went with him just to sort of support. And as they were going in, he was sort of talking to his mum about, well, how do I know I can trust these people? How do I know? And so his behavior was agitated. He was not wanting to go in. He was wanting to avoid. He was struggling to kind of even make eye contact with the mum. And actually she was able to talk to him about, well, I've met this person and I do trust them. And he was able to then use his mum's trust. But trust, safety, being accepted, belonging can all come into transitions, saying goodbye, saying hello, both sides of that. And that's important. So when we're thinking about kind of any transitions, we're also thinking about the reunions on the other side. So being a detective and thinking into that's really going to help young people and help ourselves as adults to work out why we might be feeling like that, what might be happening. I worked with an adult whose daughter had moved out of home, and she was really struggling. The mum was really struggling. And when we looked at it, it was around what had happened for her experience as a teenager and as a young person in her parents' relationship. They'd split up, and that had really affected her about where she stayed and who left and who stayed. And so when her daughter moved out, she felt really rejected. She was able to acknowledge it wasn't about her daughter wasn't rejecting her, she was moving on, it was the next stage, it was important, but she was having those feelings. And so just staying with them and being okay with them meant that she could support herself and then her daughter without taking kind of behaviors out on her daughter, not wanting to kind of let her go. Okay, so I've just included these two slides just briefly, just to give you some idea of what might be behind some of these things. So things like anger, sleep issues, over planning. I know lots of people, I'm one of those. I used to over plan with anxiety, avoidance, not doing it, don't care, not bothered. Negativity is never going to be good anyway. What's the point? Defiance. Those come from anxiety underneath. There might be anxiety. There might be other things too. So there's things like that shame feeling. A lot of people have shame and that hasn't shifted. And so shame can really drive behaviors and create anxiety. So helpless, hurt, So we're really thinking about what we see on the outside and what might be driving it underneath. And then we're putting some strategies in. You know, it might seem strange when someone's got kind of really big angry feelings to be doing something that's, you know, more about anxiety or managing your breath. And that's because actually what might be driving it. So the more we understand, the more we can put in the strategies that really help us. And again, here's things that might be, you know, you might see anxious behavior, and it might be anxious behavior, but it could be all sorts of other things as well. So it's important that we never just take everything at face value. You know, grief is a big one. You might be showing anxiety, but there's grief below, or rejection, overwhelmed, depressed. So, and again, we might be thinking about what do you need in those situations. We can do some work with the anxiety. Like I said, when young people come, we work on giving them some strategies for anxiety, and then we look at what's underneath, what's the feeling that's kind of driving that anxious behaviors. Okay. So ultimately, like I said, my goal is not to eliminate anxiety, it's to manage it. We don't avoid things because of anxiety. We have to kind of feel the fear and do it anyway, but we need support to do that. We don't just kind of tell kids, go on, get on with it, because actually they need support, they need our help, they need strategies. But we also don't want to go, okay, we'll never leave home because you're too anxious. So we have to find that balance. And there's something about, we can't avoid anxiety, it's human, it's important, but how do we put some kind of positive aspects to that? And we might do things like, I know you're scared, and, you know, we might talk to ourselves, I know I'm scared and I can get help because anxiety will pass. And that's important to remember, that feelings do pass. They can feel like they're never going to, but they do. We know that in terms of anatomically they have to pass. So just reminding yourself that it feels really awful now and it will pass. What we don't know is how long, and that's the hard part. Okay, so I might encourage people or ourselves to tolerate the anxiety. It's okay, it's just anxiety. What we don't want to do is get into fearing the fear. That can really drive behavior. So just tolerating, I know I'm anxious, I can feel my anxiety. That's okay, I know what to do with anxiety. If we can, we try and keep our anticipatory periods short. Like I said, when we're really worried about something, we don't know, you know, we're waiting for it to happen. That can take a huge amount of time. So if you are planning kind of transitions, instead of not giving yourself 3 months, it might be something thinking, well, I can do this in 6 weeks or whatever it might be, to really kind of support ourselves, because otherwise we can overthink. Think it through through someone else. So if my friend was feeling anxious, what would I tell them? Sometimes it's much easier to externalize things, to put it onto somebody else, because then we can think again. Because if we sort of separate ourselves from it, we go, well, I know, I'll tell my friend it's okay to feel anxious. And I tell my friend that what they needed to do was, you know, maybe do some breathing, or I'm going to introduce you to Havening. We would be able to do that. And sometimes that can be really helpful. Yeah, and as adults, we want to model healthy anxiety and regulation. So the more regulated we are as a society and as a system, we can really support young people and children. When the adults are anxious and floundering, of course, that's going to create more anxiety for children and young people. Again, it's not adults don't feel anxious. It's about how we model healthy anxiety management and regulation using strategies. Okay, so 5 ways to deal with anxiety. Again, some of these hopefully are familiar. Relaxation, basic needs, so paying attention to our sleep, our food, and our exercise. Connecting with others. We are a pack animal, whether we like to know that or not. We do need people, and actually that helps us to regulate. So babies regulate through people, so co-regulation, and actually we can really use other people to regulate. So if we go to very calm people, we'll pick up on their feelings. Connecting with nature. We know that nature brings anxiety down. There's something very familiar and very consistent about nature. We talked about anxiety coming up when things are unpredictable. Nature is nature. It changes. We have our seasons and we have our rain and we have our snow, but it's without fail, those things will happen. And so actually there's something quite calming in that, because we know the change happens, but it's kind of consistently through the year. We try and pay attention to good things when we're feeling anxious. It's very easy to get caught on the negatives. It's very easy to focus on what didn't work or what's bad's going to happen, or those kind of negative experiences, rather than focusing on what good could happen. Okay, and I'm just going to go a little bit into depth of these, not hugely. After I show you this, this is just a 2-minute clip, just to kind of talk you through, again, thinking a little bit about that top brain and the lower brain and why we're doing kind of both. So these strategies I talked about here, these 5 things, some of them will be the attack, kind of a targeting the baseline, the lower brain, and some of them are about our top brain, our thinking brain, and we can use both. If we get it kind of at different times. If we're not in the red, we can pay attention to good things. For example, we might make decisions to go out in nature. If we're in the red, we might need to be paying attention to basic needs and just breathing and relaxation, or getting things out. Okay, so this is just a 2-minute clip. This is Dan Siegel. Oh, I did press go. Oh, yes, it's coming. I've got a spinny wheel, I'm afraid. Hopefully it'll catch up in a second. While it's doing that, let me just do, so Dan Siegel's done a lot of work around, he's a neuroscientist and psychiatrist. He's got lots of books around parenting children, parenting ourselves, and thinking a little bit about what's happening in the brain when we're feeling feelings. So this is just a very quick clip on one of his aspects, but he is a really good person that you can look up, and he's got some lovely YouTube clips and things. So, you don't have to go and read his books necessarily. You can find some of his stuff online, which is really handy. Oh, is it going to come? Not today.
There are studies that everybody should know about that I summarize with the phrase, name it to tame it. So if you're really agitated, you're frightened of being rejected again, or you're really upset with what happened, or you're angry or whatever, in Maria's right brain, I can tell you there's, in addition to right and left, there's, now please excuse these incredibly simplistic statements, but there's an upstairs brain and a downstairs brain. Now, I'm fine with that for this parenting book, but believe me, my other foot is in science, and the scientists would see that and go, what? But the fact is, there's a cortical rim where a lot of this higher stuff goes on, and there's everything below the cortex. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your fingers, put your hands over the top, give this a try. This would be in my brain like this, see? And so this would be the cortex where you do all your thinking and planning and all that kind of stuff. If you lift up your cortex, you have everything below the cortex, which we call the downstairs brain. That's reasonable. Downstairs is just a substitute for the word subcortical, which freaks parents out. So downstairs. And it's the upstairs brain is the cortex. Okay, so you lift up your upstairs brain, you go to your downstairs brain, that's the subcortex. It's the limbic area, and it's the brainstem. These are very ancient circuits responsible for things like emotion and motivation and fight, flight, freeze reaction and your arousal states, whether you're awake or asleep, stuff like that. So what happens at that moment is, if we did a scan on your brain, we would say that your right amygdala, your limbic area, and your downstairs brain, the downstairs brain is super active. I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. And studies show that if you have this kind of presence and of mind, I can get Maria's left brain to name the feeling from the downstairs brain. And you can show that she will squirt soothing neurotransmitters down to her right limbic area, right downstairs brain, and calm it down.
Okay, So just noticing that we can use that thinking part of our brain if we're not in the red. So if we're not in that red, we can use some of our thinking to calm us down. If we are in red, we can't. It's much harder. Then we might need someone else to do some of that. So we might use, some of our parents might do that for young people. Like, I can see you're really scared, I can see you're really anxious, so that we might do some of that for them, so that just helps to start to allow them to use their name it to tame it support systems. So that's important, but we can't always use those. And the reason I'm saying that is because sometimes people say, well, adults will say to young people, go and calm down. Well, they might not be able to, because they might not have that capacity, in which case we need to be using some of those bottom-up strategies. So going for that kind of, like you said, the limbic system, that little internal part. Okay. And that's where something like breathing comes in. So progressive muscle relaxation, where you're kind of getting your body to relax from your toes to your calves, and you make them tight, and then you release them, make them tight, release them. That's progressive muscle relaxation. And the more we relax our body, the more that will support the brain to relax. So this is what we call bottom up. We might use meditation. If you are in a calmish place, you can meditate, take yourself away. But breathing, one of our key parts is breathing. And as I said at the beginning, what happens when you are anxious, your breathing changes. So a lot of people who've had chronic kind of anxiety, they don't breathe well. So they breathe in the top half of their lungs. They don't do that nice belly breath. And so actually sometimes it's really important to start to practice belly breathing. And it is practicing, it's a daily thing. We need to do it more often. The more we do it, the more our bodies will remember to do it. If we do it once and then people come and say, Lynne, it didn't work. It's like, well, that's because it won't work just that once. It will start, it takes practice, but we do need to slow breathing down when we start to feel anxious, because the tendency is to want to speed up and do that short breathing. So it tends to be a bit more panty. So we want to get longer breaths. So sometimes people use counting, count in for 5, count out for 5, go to count in for 6, count out for 6. I like to use what I call door breathing. It's slightly, we want to get slightly longer out breath with that one. So the reason I use a door is just so that you can watch something that's rectangle, and you track across the top with your eyes, and you breathe in and you breathe out. You breathe in along the bottom and you breathe out up the side. Okay, and that's just to support one coming back into the room. When we get anxious, we tend to want to go into ourselves. We want to stay out of ourselves, and then to breathe. Things like exam rooms are really helpful because there's usually a door. Interview rooms is usually windows. Windows tend to be rectangular, not always, but we can find rectangles. So breathing is, if you're not going to do anything else when you're feeling anxious, breathe. And that's because the more breath we get, the more oxygen we get, the more that helps our thinking come back online. And then we can slowly start the system back, and it'll help all our organs as well, gets oxygen to them. Okay. There's also something what I call anchoring. So you might find a happy memory or a happy person or a time when you felt calm, and you practice drawing that up. So you practice going into that place. So finding a place in, maybe it's a real place, it could be imagined, it doesn't have to be real, but practicing going to that place in your head and getting to a calm place. Again, the more you practice that, the more you can do it quicker in the moment. And so you can anchor. One of my clients over the years used to have a memory, just it was a snippet with a grandparent. But when she thought of that one snippet, and it wasn't long, it was a couple of minutes of this grandparent, they did something together and they just smiled, and this young man remembered it. And for him, that was anchoring. So he could then pull that memory up. And like I said, it wasn't long, it wasn't a huge kind of event that happened. It was just a moment of feeling enjoyed by his grandfather. And it probably didn't happen very often, but in that moment, it really did. And he could use that. Okay, so breathing, trying to get equal in and out, or a little bit longer out, slowing it down. If you're somebody who short breathes for a long time, you do need to practice, because what can happen is if you start taking really big breaths, you can feel a bit lightheaded. That's because you get quite a lot of oxygen. So, to take a practice and do it slowly. Or like I said, anchoring to a memory or an event, where you can kind of just pull up a feeling for your body where it felt calm. If our body can feel calm, it can help the brain. Okay, sleep, exercise, eat and exercise. Sleep is often affected by anxiety, although at the moment research is showing that poor sleep affects anxiety, so it's chicken and egg, that goes both ways. So we're not sure, but they are completely kind of linked together. So if you really are not getting good sleep, then that would be your focus, is really trying to help yourself get sleep, however that might be. And there's sleep hygiene routines and things you do between turning off, you know, having a routine at night time, not having caffeinated drinks and all those things, but also just something there about, and I'm going to show you havening. I haven before I go to bed, just because it's the only time I can fit it in. But it's really helpful, and something there about just really paying attention to sleep, because if we get sleep, our anxiety will come down a bit. Eating. So what we know is our bodies have, over the years, we've evolved and we've discovered a quick high of sugar and processed food. So we get dopamine release, we get good kind of quick kind of reward systems released with those kind of foods, but they're actually not great for our hormones and our energy levels. So obviously in terms of high cortisol, when you are stressed, you tend to want sugar. There's some research showing us that that's when we tend to go for the sugar, which obviously is a quick, it's to do with that fight, flight and ready to run, but actually it's not. We come down, we have those sugar lows, but also it affects our insulin release, and then our insulin release means that we kind of shoot up and down rather than have that consistent energy, so it can make us more anxious actually. So just kind of paying attention to eating, and I know it's easier said than done, because I am very much aware that when I get anxious, I have to catch myself and think I'm just anxious. I don't actually need any food. But sometimes over the years, young people who had tricky starts, they've learned that when I feel anxious, I eat. Comfort eating. Unfortunately, it's only a short, it helps in that short moment, but it actually makes things worse in the long run. And so actually, if you can focus on eating, that's important. Exercise, walking in nature, being out. We know that getting energy out, so anxious energy is kind of fizzy energy, and if you can get some of that out through walking or doing exercise, or that supports your body. Again, that also supports sleep. There's some research around yoga and trauma. So people who've had really traumatic experiences or early starts, we know that there's Bessel van der Kolk's done a lot of research about yoga and how effective using yoga is in terms of treating trauma and stress and anxiety. So if you're ever interested in that, you can have a look that up. Okay, mindfulness. People have talked about mindfulness over the years. It's paying attention to the good things. You might notice things, so paying attention to the outside world. Like I said, what's good about this part of mindfulness is different parts of mindfulness. One's kind of meditative, one's out. Is if you're anxious, you tend to want to go inside, but if you pay attention to the leaves or the colors or things like that, it helps you just to stay out of your body. It helps you to keep that thinking part of your brain. It also helps you not to get caught on the overthinking. So if something comes into your head, part of mindfulness is to kind of notice it and let it go. Takes practice, because obviously we're going to get caught on it. Mindful eating, slowing things down. So what mindfulness does really well is slow stuff down. So the more we kind of, if we mindfully eat, it means you literally are tasting every bite, and that might put you off some foods, but you might really like other things. Just slowing things down. And mindful colouring, I've got a 10-year-old and he does mindful colouring, and he will tell you it's really helpful. When he's feeling a bit fizzy, he'll go and colour, and it just calms his system down. Linked with that is obviously gratitude diaries, thinking about the positives, so noticing when things are going well. So I did that really well. My transition, I was really worried about that, but actually I walked into the building and I was really proud of myself for that. Something about panic attacks, just getting to the door might be huge, and it's about how do you celebrate some of your successes, and you kind of feel gratitude to yourself and for your achievements. Okay, lovely. So hopefully that's given you some things. And now I'm going to introduce you to something called havening. And I know I don't have forever in the day, but this is something I'm really enjoying at the moment. It's a new technique. It's a bit weird, so I'll put that out there. In terms of, it's a psychosensory therapy. So it's about sensory touch and pleasant distraction. And what it does is it pays attention to the body. It is science-based, so although it looks a bit strange and it can feel a bit strange and you can feel a bit odd doing it, it is based in science. what we know is havening touch, which is literally rubbing from your arms down to your elbows, and rubbing your hands together, and rubbing your face. You don't even have to always do all three. You can do whichever feels comfortable for you. It increases your serotonin and your oxytocin and your GABA, which is in your brain. So it's like neurochemicals, and they are a kind of our stress release reduction chemicals. So they really help with kind of cortisol levels and things like that. But also it just calms kind of the amygdala. And this is where it's so exciting, because actually we're finding something that's really targeting. What I'm introducing you today is self-havening. So it's a part of havening. We're using it in terms of therapy across the world. Therapists are training in it, and it's about kind of trauma. It can really impact trauma experiences or phobias, and it really shifts it and quickly. If you've had a really tricky start as a child and there's multiple trauma, then it's not as effective yet, but there's lots of research going in because it's a new work. It also stimulates delta waves, which is really interesting because that's what we have it when we sleep. We don't normally have them in the daytime unless we lay trauma memory. And so what it does is it brings up these delta waves in the brain. It's developed by Dr. Rudin in America. And he's a Harvard academic, and he's a neuroscientific researcher. And he's a practicing GP in America. So he's doing a lot of this in kind of practice, and it's been going for a couple of years now. It's not new, it's newer to this country. And it's kind of all across the world, like I said, but they're doing some lovely stuff. So just wanted to introduce you to it in terms of self-care and managing anxiety today. Okay, so this is what it looks like in terms of self-havening. Like I said, so you're rubbing your arms, so it's kind of up, and your face and your hands. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there in terms of, I'm going to stop my sharing, and then I'm going to show you and give you an experience of it. Okay, so hopefully you can see me there. All right, so this is your havening touch, so it's your arms. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is do it along with me. I'm going to kind of talk you through something brief. I've just kind of jotted some notes for myself to keep myself on track. Okay, so you want to sit comfortably, kind of supported by your chair, feet firmly on the ground. And just notice your breath. Don't change it, just notice it. And if we can, because we're thinking of anxiety, just get in touch with some of your anxiety, something that's bringing anxiety up. Maybe it's a change that's coming up. Maybe it's COVID experiences. Maybe it's the transitions. Maybe my house move. And just bring that into your awareness. So bring up that anxiety. I can really feel that in my chest when I think about my house move. I can feel that here. A little bit of breath change. So that's my anxiety, and I want you just, if you can, just to score it for you. It's subjective on a 0 to 10 scale. So 10 being how uncomfortable, 10 being it's really uncomfortable, it's really distressing, 0 being not bothered. Okay, so mine is only a little bit. It's not too high because I'm kind of aware of it. I know where it's coming from, but I can still feel that anxiety. Okay, so just pull it up. And what I'm going to do is, what we do, okay, in touch, just clear your mind quickly, take a breath, clear your mind, and picture yourself. You can either close your eyes or look down and picture yourself either on a beach or in a lovely park, somewhere that's kind of outside, that see yourself in the air, maybe a warm sunny day, or if you like cold and crispy, or just notice, put yourself in that situation. And as you do that, I'm going to get you just to walk along, whether it's along the beach or whether it's out in a park or whether it's in a field, and just taking 20 steps. We're going to count aloud as we do that. So I'm going to count with you. So it'll be 1, 2, just see yourself walking, 3, 4. With every step, keep your arms kind of, keep havening, keep the touch going. With every step as you walk, 5, 6, just feel the calmness coming. 7, 8, 9, 10. Just let that kind of anxiety go. 11, 12, 13, 14. I can feel my breath changing. 15, 16, 17. It's easier to breathe. 18, 19, 20. That's great. So keep stroking. And as you're doing that, you're just feeling calmer, taking in the environment, taking in what you can see, whether you're on the beach or whether you are, just noticing. What can you see? I can see a woods, so I can see trees, and sometimes this is harder for people, so that's okay. If you can't find yourself in a situation, I'm going to do some other things in a minute, which we can do. Just take a moment. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go onto my hands. So I'm going to just rub my hands together like you're washing your hands, so it's palm on palm. And if you just follow along with that, and I'm going to do a bit of a fun distraction. So if you struggle to kind of do a visualization, that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to, and I'm aware this is being filmed, so this might come back to haunt me, but I'm going to sing or hum along to Twinkle Twinkle. So something just a bit silly. So you'll see that I've got a rubbish voice, doesn't matter. Hopefully when I'm working with people, they have a good giggle at that, and that's okay too. So you can use distractions like that. It just takes you away from what you think about. Yeah, so just notice how you're feeling calmer, your body's more relaxed. Yeah, and what we're going to do now is going to do a little bit of maths, and everyone, when they hear that word, they panic. It's not about that. I'm just going to get you to count backwards from 30 in twos. I'm going to count with you. And I am going to go into my face. I like my face, but if you don't feel comfortable doing that, that's absolutely fine. But just to show you, it's a bit like washing your face. Okay, so I'm going to count back from 30, 28, 26, 24, 22, 20, 18, 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2, and then a 0. Okay, and then just check in. How are you doing? How are you feeling? I can feel much calmer. Hopefully you've had that experience too. What you can do is go over it a couple of times should you need to. So if you're still feeling the feeling, you do it a couple more times. And what you do is add in distractions that'll just take your brain away. Whether you're counting the leaves on the trees or whether you are having a picnic basket, was one of my favorites to say to clients. You're going on a picnic, you take 5 things with you. What 5 things are you taking? And you can take anything that you're allowed. At that point, people feel guilty and say, oh, I'm taking, chocolate and fancy cheese and maybe a beverage or 2. So kind of just a distraction while you apply the touch, and that will help the anxiety. At the end of that, what we like to add in is just to take a breath. If you are going to haven, just a moment when I open my mind to learning, I open my heart to friendship, and I choose to feel safe, peaceful, and calm. And there is something about allowing a choice. I choose to feel calm, safe, and relaxed. Hopefully that gives you some experience of a little bit of havening. What you can also try with havening, I'm going to give you another one just quickly, is picture the thing that's coming up. So I'm going to picture that I'm moving, and I'm going to talk you through it while I do the havening touch. Okay, so I'm going to talk about it being a successful move. So it's a bit like sports psychology. If you talk to athletes, they will tell you how they see themselves doing whatever it is. If you're a high jumper, you see yourself jumping over the high jump. If you are running a race, you see yourself winning, doing well. So it's a bit like that. So you apply the havening touch and you do that. So I can say I see myself moving, packing boxes, and actually it goes well, and I've actually labeled them well, which is quite nice. Organization. And then I can see myself getting to the new house and opening the door. And as I open the door, I notice there's a little bit, it's probably feeling a little bit kind of cooler. So I'm thinking about curtain heating on, And then I'm going to find rooms to put my boxes in. And then I'm going to slowly see myself over, I'm going to give myself some days. So over a couple of days unpacking. And then feeling kind of, this is my home. Yeah. And what I do is I get you to do that maybe 2 or 3 times in the moment. And then as the event comes, closer to the event, do it more and more. So once a day, or just sort of practice seeing yourself doing that thing, and focusing on it going to plan, going well. And if you apply the havening touch, what it does is it kind of reinforces the experience with positive hormone changes, positive kind of chemicals, and we go into that situation with less of the anticipation anxiety because we've already seen ourselves doing it. So it's not so new anymore. We've planned it, we've seen it. We can see ourselves in that positive place. Okay, so that kind of brings me to the end of my talk today. I hope that's been kind of useful. And obviously I know at some point we're going to have a Q&A, I think, so I can help you to think more about that. In terms of havening, there's lots of clips online, kind of if you look at self-havening, and kind of there's some YouTube clips that have come out around COVID and managing some of those stressful times. So go and have a look, go and have a see. It's a really nice empowering tool to work with through some of our kind of bigger experiences and anxiety. Good. Well, thank you for listening, and I hope that was a helpful session for people.